Okay, I will see if I can get to my screen share here.
Good job, Bob.
And go to,
We're seeing it.
so there we go.
You stand to speak.
Okay, should see full screen now.
Yep.
Okay, welcome to the first class of this series. If you were there last week for the introduction, ideally, you will have taken a look at element T2 in the program. Again, I'm Jim, AE7UQ, my call sign. I live in Bellingham, Washington, just south of the Canadian border.
Could those folks that are not the presenter mute themselves, please? We're getting some stray noise.
Are we muted? We need to mute. How do we mute, Robert? Oh, I thought we just turn on the plug-in.
Oh, speaker?
Yeah.
That's gonna mess it up.
Okay, well, I will carry on. Yeah, we're going to cover section T2. There's 3 parts to T2. It's a total of 36 questions. I think overall, I think it may have been covered last week. In the technician exam, the question pool is a total of 412 questions. You'll be getting 35 of those, and you get a question out of each of the sections and subsections. We have 3 sections to T2, so you'll be getting 3 questions out of the 36 questions that we will be reviewing today. What I'm going to do is go through with a little bit of overview with each of the 3 sections, and then we'll go through each question and show you what the correct answer is, and hopefully you will have been able to figure them out either by having reviewed previously or by remembering what we covered in some of the prelims. So you'll have all the correct answers for this section after today. The first section covers what we call calling procedures. It covers radio repeaters, which are like relay stations, and it also not too much on what we call band plans. There's a plan for how you're going to utilize the frequencies that you have available to you. Calling procedures, one of the things that a new ham often says is, gee, how do I talk to somebody else? Thing to remember, it's pretty much like any communication. Let's say I want to talk to Steve. I say, hey, Steve, it's me, Jim. Same thing you do in amateur radio. You call Steve's WA7PTM, this is call sign. I say, hey, WA7PTM, this is AE7UQ. That's how you initiate a discussion. If you don't know who you want to talk to, it's sort of like knocking on somebody's door and saying, hey, anybody home? It's me, Jim, out here. The procedure you use for that in amateur radio is you can call CQ. Say CQ, CQ, AE7UQ. That says, hey, I'm here listening. Does anybody out there want to talk to me? So those are the simple ways to remember calling procedures. Repeaters. Repeaters are like relay stations. What we've shown in this diagram is some little handheld amateur radios, and they don't have a real long range, say 10 miles. So if you've got your friend that's 20 miles away, you're gonna probably, and there's a lot of mountains and stuff in the way, you're not going to be able to talk to them. But if there's a repeater in the middle, in between them, then you can call the repeater on your radio, and the repeater will take in your message, your signal, and then retransmit it to your friend on the other side of the mountain, another farther away that you can't really reach with your handheld. And that happens on 2 different frequencies. You send a message to the repeater saying, I've got a message for somebody else. And again, as I just told you, you'd say, got to repeat a message for Steve, WA7PTM. And it takes that message and then retransmits it on a different frequency. And that frequency is called the offset. We'll cover that a little bit in the next slide. So that's basically, I think it's like a cell tower. You know, when you get onto your cell phone, the signal goes to a cell tower and works its way through other cell towers to wherever you're trying to get, whoever you're trying to talk to.
So Jim,
Yep.
Mark has his hand up, and Bill, could you please mute?
Yeah, Mark.
Yes, my question is the repeater always on, number one? And that's singular, but the real point is, aren't there many repeaters scattered around, and wouldn't they all be retransmitting the original transmission?
Good segue. We'll talk about that right now. Okay, repeaters, as I said, have a transmit and receive frequency. The difference between them is what we call the offset. And there's standard offsets for repeaters, depending on the frequency. For the 2 meter band, it's a plus or minus 600 kilohertz. For what we call 220 or 1.25 meter, it's 1.6 megahertz, and 0.7 centimeters, 70 centimeters, or 7/10 of a meter, plus or minus 5 megahertz. And to your question on how come they're not all, are they on all the time, and how do your repeater know that you want to talk to them? Okay, what you do is that when you turn on your radio and put in the frequency of the repeater you want, there's some other information that's programmed into your radio. One is a subaudible tone, and that's a wake-up call for the repeater. So that repeater, if you're trying to call a repeater, let's say it's 145.68 megahertz, you have programmed in what we call in most cases, it's a CTCSS code, continuous tone code squelch system is what it stands for. And for example, it might have a tone of 105.3, that's 103.5. So when you press the little push to talk button on your radio, it zaps out your signal, and it includes that little wake up call, 103.5. So the repeater you're trying to get to here's 103.5, bing, it wakes up, it's on the air, and then it retransmits the signal. And that all happens instantaneously. So that's why your repeater only hears what, you only get to the repeater you want if you have your radio program properly. There's also a digital, the CTCSS is an analog signal. DCS is the digital equivalent. Most of the repeaters that we use are CTCSS activated. Another tone or system you can see, this is particularly with a repeater system called IRLP, Internet Linked Repeater System, IRLP, linking program, DTMF, and this is tones you punch in with the keypad, like on your radio or your phone, beep, 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 beep. You punch those in on the keypad. So it's another way of getting into the system that's not operating until you want it to operate. So these, if you remember these, some of this stuff, then it'll be clear when we get to some of the questions. But does that answer your question, Mark?
Yes, thank you very much, Jim.
Okay. FM, AM, just a simple diagram on this. Most of the thing, there's FM comes up in a lot of questions, and just so you're familiar with the difference between amplitude modulation and frequency modulation. Others are squeezing the wavelengths together with the frequency modulation, whereas the amplitude is with your, and again, you know this from your AM and FM radios. The other thing to remember, and you need to, this helps in figuring out the questions. This is, as a new ham, this is the most important number to remember is 300, because that's a simple way, that's the way to convert wavelength to frequency and back again. I talked about 2 meters, The frequencies you're going to see on 2 meters are 150 plus or minus 300 divided by 2 and vice versa. So if you've got a 145 megahertz signal, then you know that's in the 2 meter range. So 300 is really a good number to remember if you say, gee, they're asking me about a wavelength and I want the frequency. This doesn't really come up in this part of the course, but it comes up in other parts. When you get into the T1, the first section, which is on the FCC rules, if you can find a lot of the answers to the questions there by looking at the specifics on this chart. And this is just a chart that shows through all the amateur bands what the where all the amateur frequencies are. We won't go into any of that in this session, but just a good, and I'm sure it's in the books if you're using a book. So let's see what we learned. Okay, first question should be pretty simple. 2 meters, okay. We saw that on the previous chart. The plus or minus, the offset is a plus or minus 600. Again, you just have to remember those. But if you've studied it, then you'll know that 600 was one of the choices that we looked at for possible frequency offsets. This is one you just have to remember, but you can, if you remember your formula, 300, you know 2 meters, okay, so 300 divided by 2 is 150, so it's got to be one of the first two. I know it's not the other two because that's in a different, those are not 2 meter frequencies. And then you'll just have to know that 146.520 is what they call the national calling frequency. One of the frustrations if you're a new ham and you say, I'll call the national calling frequency, virtually there's hardly anybody ever on it. So out of interest, the answer D is the national calling frequency for UHF. Okay, we just covered this. What is the common repeater frequency offset for 70 centimeters? That's the plus or minus 5. What's an appropriate way to call another station on a repeater if you know the other station's call sign? Well, we sort of went through this. Hey, Steve, it's me, Jim. Call the other station's call sign and identify your call sign. Remember, in the FCC rules, identifying yourself is a key part of any transmission. So by remembering just how do you normally communicate with somebody, you can figure out that that's the logical answer here. How should you respond to a station calling CQ? You know, remember we said CQ is a sort of, hey, I'm out here waiting to talk to somebody. And again, remember, how do you talk to somebody? That's like Steve saying, hey, I'm out here. And I say, hey, Steve, it's me, Jim. Transmit the other station's call sign followed by your call sign. So that's, again, that's the thing to remember just in general, because I said a lot of new hams say, well, gee, how exactly do I call them first, my name first, that sort of thing. This is related to that. Which of the following is required when making an on-the-air test transmissions? Remember FCC rule, you need to identify yourself, and you just have what you would typically say in something like this is, I would say, this is AE7UQ radio check. I'm new on this frequency. I'm not sure whether my signal's getting out okay. Could somebody who is listening, who may be listening, get back to me and tell me what my signal's like? So identify your transmitting station. The other ones, you know, not too logical. What's meant by repeater offset? Well, we know that. We've talked about that already. Difference between the repeaters transmit and receive frequencies. The other ones, time delay, identification, no, these don't really fit once you understand how a repeater works. What's the meaning of the procedural signal CQ? We covered that. Calling any station. Hey, I'm here. Does anybody out there want to talk? None of the other ones are really applicable. call on the quarter hour. Well, that's pretty weird. Okay, which of the following indicates that a station is listening on a repeater and looking for a contact? This is the one where we'll talk a little about nets in one of the next sections, but often, somebody, if you'll find a ham will be sitting at his desk or at his radio doing some other work and maybe listening to a particular frequency for a repeater, maybe a popular repeater in the area. And he might get on the air and just say, hey, this is Alpha Echo 7 Uniform Quebec AE7UQ monitoring. That just says this station is on that frequency listening to what may or may not be going on the repeater. If somebody else is out there, they say, hey, Jim, I heard you. I'm, WA7PTM. What's going on? So again, needing to identify yourself under FCC rules, and in this case, you just say monitoring. Now, if you're on the thing, on the frequency, and you've been talking, and you're going to go off and do something else and shut off your radio, then you'd say AE7UQ clear. I'm leaving the frequency and going to do something else. So again, this is the monitoring is the key here. What is the band plan beyond the privileges established by the FCC? Well, if you think about how a repeater works, a repeater, it has a receive frequency and a transmit frequency. So those are two specific frequencies that need to be sort of reserved in the spectrum for that particular repeater, because you don't want somebody else talking on those frequencies if they're really dedicated to the repeater. And what you do is come up with what we call a band plan. There's a group in Western Washington called WWARA, Western Washington, forget what the ARA is, but it's a group of amateurs to get together and work out, okay, if we've got these three repeaters in this county on this frequency, then we've got to make sure they don't conflict with the frequencies, the repeaters in the next county, or simplex frequencies. And we talked earlier about the national calling frequencies, so that we don't want any repeaters to be conflicting with the national calling frequency. So it's a pretty complex exercise. And in some areas, because of the dual nature, each repeater has to have two frequencies. There's no room for any other new repeaters because there's so many reservations already on the amateur band. So that's basically what the band plan is. I think I mentioned it in the, what is the term describes an amateur station that is transmitting and receiving on the same frequency? That's what we call simplex. In other words, just two radios talking directly to each other. If it's going through a repeater you've got two frequencies involved, then it's duplex. So simplex, what somebody will often say, if you're on a repeater, for example, they might say, hey, let's get off this repeater and just communicate directly. I'll go to you on 145.65 simplex. And what you should do before calling CQ. Now, this is sort of a courtesy thing. What if somebody's, basically this is the process you would normally use. What they always tell you is, and it's good practice, is if you're going to ever get on a frequency, listen to it first. Make sure nobody else is using it. For example, a lot of repeaters are reserved for particular periods of time. The club in Vancouver has a net that runs from 7 to 7:30 every Tuesday. So that repeater is going to be busy then. So you check and see if you don't hear anything, then ask. It might be a break in the net or something. Is this frequency in use? And then make sure that you're not in the band you shouldn't be on. And so once you've done all that, then you should be good to go and get on that repeater. And call CQ if you're looking for somebody else to talk to. So that's part one. Any questions on that? Let's move on. We've covered some of this stuff already. A lot of this is more stuff on repeaters. We'll also get into Q codes. But first, and then there's not a lot of new stuff that we haven't already talked about. So we'll just jump right into the questions. How is the VHF UHF repeaters reverse function used? Now remember, we talked about the repeater has a receive frequency, in other words, frequency you called it on, and then it has a transmit frequency, what it sends out the message on. And what the reverse does is it switches those around. And so you're listening on the output frequency of the repeater. Now, what if you listen on the input frequency? That's the reverse. What happens there is if somebody else is calling, you can hear them calling the repeater. If somebody's having a problem getting into the repeater, often another ham will say, hey, I can hear you on the input, but you must have some problem because you're not getting into the repeater. I don't hear you on the output. In other words, his signal is getting out, it's not getting to the repeater, and you can hear that his signal is getting out, but he's not hearing any response because his output is not getting to the repeater. And it's a frequency question, so you can eliminate power outputs. And D is what you're already doing if you're not in reverse. You're listening on the output frequency. So the correct answer is on the input frequency. We've already covered this. What term describes the use of a subaudible tone transmitted along with the normal voice audio to open the squelch of a receiver? And opening the squelch basically means that so it comes to life. And that's a CTCSS. And I've already forgotten what the acronym stands for, but we saw it before. Which of the following describes a linked repeater network? I think the key here is network. It's a network of repeaters in which signals received by one repeater are transmitted by all the repeaters in the network. There's a lot of, I know on Vancouver Island up here in British Columbia, there's what they call the island trunk. And so there's a whole string of repeaters on Vancouver Island that are linked. So if you get into one repeater, you can basically access to anybody along that network. So it's not a single repeater, it's multiple repeaters, but not same control. And APRS is a different system. So this is the correct answer. Which of the following could be a reason you are unable to access a repeater whose output you can hear? Offset, do you have the right offset? Oops. Do you have the right offset? We've already talked about you need these tones to get into the repeater. If you don't have the right tone, it's not going to hear you. So all of these could be a reason why gee, I think I'm on the right frequency. What's the problem here? And again, that can be frustrating when you say, I know this is the right frequency, and either there's an offset and there shouldn't be, or there isn't any offset. What would cause your FM transmission audio to be distorted on voice peaks? Offset shouldn't affect that. You're going to have a problem getting out entirely. Basically, it's just if you're talking too loudly into the mic is what causes the distortion. What type of signaling uses pairs of audio tones? That's DTMF. I think I'm terrible at remembering at my age what the things for us is. Digital tone multi-frequency or something like that, but it's dual tone. Dual tone is a DT, and that's the thing to remember about DTMF. And again, you remember that's the signal that sounds like you punch it in with numbers on a keyboard. Usually there's a 9 or 4-digit number that you punch in to access a particular system on the radio. This is a little different topic. How can you join the Digital Repeaters Talk Group? Now this involves a radio system called DMR, Digital Mobile Radio, which is a whole separate topic, and we won't get into the background on DMR and the details on DMR. But the thing about DMR to remember is that if you buy a DMR handy-talkie handheld radio, it's worthless until you've got a program. Any DMR radio is not going to work until you've got a program. So it runs on programs, the firmware program, as well as what we call a code plug, which has all of the information needed to access the DMR repeater, as well as the DMR network. And DMR is networked around the world. So basically, program is the key thing to remember here. Talk group is part of DMR program, so you need to program your radio properly with the group's ID code. Which of the following applies when two stations transmitting on the same frequency interfere with each other? Now, this is sort of a common or courtesy, really. As I said, there's a band plan, so if you're in the right area in the band plan, this happens, quite a bit. You get on the rate. But if you go through, remember the procedures, what do you do before getting onto a frequency or getting onto a repeater? Check that nobody else is using it. So if nobody else is using it, you're not likely to do this. But basically, if somebody else is coming on and neither of you have priority use, in other words, you're not part of an established net, then you just say, hey, it's sort of like two cars coming into a four-way stop at the same time. Okay, you go, no, you go. And you can agree on a way to, well, I'll go on to a different frequency and you can use this one, or we can both. So B could be possible, but A is really the first step. Okay, I don't need to use this frequency, I can use another one, that sort of thing. And then the other ones are not really appropriate. Yeah. Okay, why are simplex channels designated in the UHF, VHF band plans? We talked a little about the repeaters being, there's a lot of repeaters in some areas. The repeaters tie up a whole lot of frequencies, but a lot of people, if you live close to somebody, you don't want to tie up a repeater if you don't need to. One of the guidelines in radio is you try to use the lowest power you need. And if you don't need a repeater to communicate with your neighbor 3 miles away, then you don't need to use it. And there are simplex bands allocated in the band plans in your area. Q codes. You probably heard about these. Q codes were developed in CW, in the Morse code, when primarily for Morse code, as a way to avoid having to send so many words in Morse code. For example, and I'll highlight a few of these, QRM. I've got interference. Interference is being a problem for me. So that's just 3 letters in Morse code rather than trying to explain it in Morse code. QRP is another one you hear a lot. Somebody might say, hey, are there any QRP stations out there? That means, are there any low power stations that need to get into the net? Another one that's QRZ is basically, who are you? There's a website for, once you get into amateur radio, that you can look up anybody's call sign. That's an identification. Okay, I know WA7PTM, I can look up his call sign and figure out that he's in Vancouver, Washington, and sometimes there's even a bio. QSL, you may have heard of QSL cards. When you complete a contact, particularly internationally, often you'll get a QSL card that says, yes, confirming that we communicated on such and such a date on such and such a frequency. QSO is just basically a contact. Hey, good QSO, good QSO today, good QSO today. Yeah, we had a good conversation. QST, that's the name of the National Amateur Radio Relay League magazine. Another one you hear a lot is QSY. Hey, we've got QRM on this station, this frequency, let's QSY to another frequency. Let's go to another frequency and try that. And QTH, what's your location? Where are you? So, and again, you don't need to remember all these. You only need to remember 2 for the test. Which Q signal indicates you're receiving interference from other stations, QRM. And which Q signal indicates you're changing the frequency, QSY. And this is another DMR question. What's the purpose of the color code used in DMR repeater systems? And again, this is part of the programming that goes into the DMR radio, the code plug. And it's basically similar to the codes that we talked about on repeaters. It basically is in the program that tells the repeater which groups you want to go to, or how to identify groups you want to go to. So it establishes groups within the programming. And that's, yeah, groups is the thing to remember there. And this is sort of a general question. What is the purpose of a squelch function? Basically, when you turn on a radio, a lot of times you'll hear a lot of hiss, background noise, that sort of thing. And what you can do with the squelch is the squelch knob, the squelch tuning can mute out all that hash out there, and so that you'll only hear strong signals. And so that makes your radio quiet until you hear a strong signal. So basically, to mute the receiver audio when a signal is not present. It's very handy because it makes it a lot less noisy. But if you are trying to catch a weak signal, then you've got to sort of try to find them in the background noise. And that's part 2. Any questions? Moving on. Okay, now we're going to talk a little about public service, nets and traffic procedures, and just a reminder on the phonetic alphabet. Phonetic alphabet comes up again in another part of the exam. You don't have to know the phonetic alphabet, you just have to know when it should be used, but it's a very good idea to learn it because it's very useful. Let's see, here we go. Public service groups. There's 2 primary public service groups. The first is what we call RACES, the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. This came out of the civil defense. You can see on the emblem here, the civil defense triangle. Specifically, I think it was developed in the 50s probably. These organizations are supported by a municipality, so it's sort of related to a government organization. Most of these groups are currently called Auxiliary Communication Services, ACS groups. These groups are only activated by a government organization. I'm in a group called Bellingham ACS. I'm also in a group called Whatcom County ACS, one by the city of Bellingham's Office of Emergency Service, the other sort of sponsored as part of the sheriff's office in the county. So those are one of the main organizations that for emergency communications. Amateur radio operators join these groups to help out with emergency communications in their area. The one that's related, and many radio amateurs wear both hats, both the RACES ACS hat and an ARES hat. ARES is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, and this was organized by the Amateur Radio Relay League, which is the Amateur Radio Relay League, which is the national organization for ham radio. And these groups are not associated directly with a municipality. They can support a municipality, they can support other organizations, and they don't necessarily have to be called out or be activated by a governmental organization. So it's just those, these will both come up in the exam. Bit on radio nets and traffic that we related to the exam questions. I am doing a specific session on what is a radio net, I think at 5 o'clock next week, if you're interested in learning more about nets. Basically, a radio net is the network of stations exchanging messages, usually with one station directing the communications. They can be social, just getting on the radio to chat with other people, or they can be in an emergency. In other words, exchanging information for the emergency operations center in a region, anything dealing with a disaster or practicing how you want to deal with it in a disaster. And messages can be taken by voice or digitally. If you're taking voice traffic, here's an example of the form that is sort of the standard for the ARRL. Remember what's pointed out here. There's preamble. What's the preamble all about? Basically, that identifies, gives you how to identify this particular message. It gives it a precedence. Is this a priority message? Is this a routine message? Who's it from? Check. Check tells you how many words there are. So if there's a problem, hey, I got a message with 9 words. Uh-oh, we got a problem. Resend, please. They're supposed to have 12 words. And all the other specifics of the message. This is with the advent of digital forms, you don't see these radiograms as much, but they're still used pretty widely. And the International Phonetic Alphabet, it's good to know this. A lot of nets, if you get onto a radio net, a lot of times the call signs are only given in phonetics. Alpha Echo 7 Uniform Quebec is my call sign. Whiskey Alpha 7 Papa Tango Lima is Steve's. And the reason you'd use the phonetic alphabet, and this will come up in the question, is the CBD, AE7 CBD, AE7 CDD. It's kind of hard to tell those if there's a lot of noise on the radio. But if I say Charlie Bravo Delta, Charlie Delta Delta, it's a lot easier to tell. Those are 2 different calls. Okay, let's finish this last section. Okay, when do FCC rules not apply to the operation of an amateur station? Well, in this case, we've talked about ARES, we've talked about RACES. FCC rules always apply. Others, these aren't reasons that they don't apply. There is an exception, which we'll see later on. Okay, which of the following are typical duties of a net control station? Okay, what did we talk about as far as a net? Somebody's usually directing the net. So the key to remember there is direct. Net control, a control station is directing what's going on. So the correct answer, call the net to order and direct communications between stations checking in. So control is the word to remember there in coming up with the right answer. What technique is used to ensure that voice messages containing unusual words are received correctly? Well, we just talked about this, phonetic alphabet. In other words, it's a lot easier to pick out a call sign if it's spelled phonetically, and particularly if you're using words that could easily be confused. You know, there's a lot of, what do they call, homonyms. Pierce, Pierce, Pierce. That could be 3 different Pierces. How do you know you've got the right one? What is RACES? We just covered that. Now, the particular, in this one, FCC Part 97 is the part of the FCC rules that cover amateur radio, and it's defined in there. Again, civil defense, RACES, radio amateur civil emergency service. It's got civil in the title, so civil defense is the thing to remember there. What does the term traffic refer to in net operations? Messages. We talked about the exchange of messages, message form, that sort of thing. So messages is the easy answer there. What is the amateur radio emergency service? We just talked about that. A group of licensed amateurs who have voluntarily registered their qualifications and equipment for community communications duty in the public service. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a particular entity that's you're involved, or a municipality, let's say, that you're involved in. Some of these sound similar. This one's military, it's not military, it's not a training program. So that eliminates B, C, and D. Which of the following is the standard practice when you participate in a net? Think about net control, somebody's directing the net. So unless you're reporting an emergency, transmit only when directed by net control. So again, direct is the key word again in this answer. Which of the following is a characteristic of good traffic handling? This is one of the things you learn when you get into classes on particularly what do amateur radios do in an emergency. You're passing traffic, you're not generating traffic. So you want to make sure that if the incident commander says, here, send this message out to the field unit in the next city, you're not going to change that message unless if there's something that looks wrong, you ask the incident commander, this doesn't look right, is this what you want to say? But once you've got a message, you send it exactly as received. Are amateur station control operators ever permitted to operate outside the frequency privilege of their license class? Well, this is the exception that I mentioned earlier. Only in situations of immediate threat to life and human life and protection of property. So it's got to be a real emergency before you can really, I need to get the message through however I can. This is really the only exception. What information is contained in the preamble of a formal traffic message? And again, we looked at this information needed to track the message. And it had priority, it had who sent it, it had the time, all that sort of stuff was in the preamble. And what did check in a radiogram header mean? We just talked about this. The number of words or word equivalents in the text portion of the message. So you can check, do I have the right number of messages? If as we said in our example, if you receive 9 words in your message and the check says it should be 12, then you've got a problem and you should do a resend. And that's it. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
You sent the list of the questions of the test in that link you sent. And there's a whole first section. And did you go through that last week? And I just somehow was abducted and missed that.
No, the first section last week was an introduction to the course. The sessions T1, T2, T3 are not in order for this class. So this is the first class session of the questions. So you haven't missed anything.
Okay, thank you.
I think T1, actually the first section comes up in a few weeks. Steve's got the schedule somewhere. But again, the questions don't need to be in order, others they don't necessarily follow. They just have certain topics. And the first section is all of the FCC rules.
So as in on the tests, they're not going to necessarily come in the order of which they're delivered.
No.
So yeah, anything could be anywhere is what
Yep.
you're saying.
Yeah, it'll say on the exam, it'll say where it came from,
Okay,
which T section, I think, as I recall. But they may be in random order. In other words, they're not going to be, okay, here's the questions from T1, here's the question from T2. They'll be in random order in the exam.
okay, thank you.
So those T numbers are basically they're called sub-elements in the nomenclature of the volunteer exam group. And so we're taking them out of order to kind of keep it kind of a gentle introduction, because T1 is rules and regulations. And if we hit you with rules and regulations on the first week, we lose half the class. So that's not coming up until week 8.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and the T1, there's not a lot of theory behind it. It basically, it's like taking the driving test, a driver's written test. You've got to know the rules, and you got to know the rules. Anybody else? So should be easy. Again, if you read through the questions and as I say, take practice exams. And I know there's links to several of the sites that have practice exams. I'm confident that you will have virtually no chance of failing. Because when you're passing over 90% on your practice exams, and you know it pretty well.
Jim, do you want to do a short QSO on DMR?
Well, yeah, DMR. I'm not an expert on DMR, but DMR is a standard that was developed by Motorola, I think. It comes off a European standard, but basically what DMR allows you to do is do twice as many communications in the same frequency. Others, it's, if you think about a frequency and you cut it in two, and the technology allows you to switch back, and your radio switches back and forth between those two parts of that same frequency. And so somebody can be talking on one half of that frequency and somebody else on the other, and you don't hear each other. The other thing about DMR is with the code plug, with once you've got your radio programmed properly, then you've got talk groups, chat rooms all around the world, the country, and you can program that into your radio and say, okay, I want you to get me to talk group 31538, which happens to be one of our group's talk groups. And your radio will go through the system and the software and find that one, and it'll connect you. It's very clear signal when you get in. There's DMR repeaters in most locations these days. We have 3 in our county. I talk to Steve every Sunday night on DMR. It sounds like he's right next door. So
the question is, turn on your radio and I can give you a call and we can show them what a radio contact sounds like.
okay, you have to give me a minute here.
We got about 8 more minutes until the Ham Radio Basics Plus session starts, and I'll give that a little bit of a plug. Every week after the class, and you don't have to attend, and other people will come in for attending it. We have special interest topics going on. And this week it's going to be about the Micro Islands projects and the layout in Kitsap County. And next week, Jim's going to give one on radio nets. The following week, I'm going to give one on a lot more information on CT, CSS, and DCS tones than you'd ever want to know. But there are some practical reasons that you'd want to be able to use it, and that's what I'll cover. So each week we have a different topic. It's not anything to do with the license. It's just kind of a more information for people that want it.
Okay, you want to try DMR?
Yeah, I got to make sure that I've got the beam pointed correctly tonight, so I'll try it next.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I usually move I've got an antenna tri-band that I move out for DMR, and I haven't moved it out, but it usually works pretty well when it's close to the.
Okay, I've got to mute and turn my sound down, or else it's going to really make a loud squeal.
87 UQ,
WA7 PTM, AE7 UQ.
Would you mind stopping the screen share so we can actually see you guys?
and just loud and clear here, and I've got the microphone turned down and the volume turned down. So I should be able to hear me over your radio output there.
Yeah, are you hearing Steve on the through the sound here?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, because my radio is about 6 feet away from my computer, so. A7 UQ here. Yeah, you're hearing you over the radio. This is my radio is about 6 feet away from my computer, so and I can't yank the mic over without pulling the radio off the stand. So it's working good though. A7 UQ. So Steve, like
Okay,
some,
excellent for doing the demo there. WA7 PTM.
so Steve sounded like he was right next door, and he's down in Vancouver, Washington. I'm up here in Bellingham, Washington. The other thing that happens with DMR is that when you first get into it, you have to wait a couple seconds before talking because it takes a couple seconds for the system to sort of boot up, you might say. And so you have to press the push to talk, wait a few seconds, and then start talking. And your radio will usually give you a little indicator when you're good to go. So there's a real-time demo for you. Anybody else? Okay, and if you tune in at 5 o'clock next Wednesday, then we'll go through nets. What are nets all about?
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. And
Oh,
given
see,
no
I
more
said
questions-
Cecilia had washed out. Is there a hand up? Or is that a hand up or is that a clapping? I'm not sure of the icons.
It was supposed to be a clapping, but I guess it is a hand up. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, I see now. Yeah, I see now. Thanks, Cecilia. Okay, well, have a good evening then.
Thank you very much, Jim. And give everybody a couple minutes break, and then we'll pick up at 5 o'clock our Pacific time with Doug in Kitsap County talking about their program on the micro islands.
Okay, using the radio terminology, AE7UQ clear.
Oh, come on, say QRT.
Clear.
So Ray, if you're still in there and not involved in your other meeting, I can't seem to get the recording stopped. And I know I'll have to restart it for the next class, but I didn't want to have it all in one recording.
he's no longer here, your best bet might be to log off and then have us all come back. If he was the,
That's not actually possible because he's the host of the meeting. And
oh,
and he moved host over to me because he's double tasking on another meeting. And the problem I've got is if I log out, and log back in, he's the one that has to admit people, but if he's not really paying attention, then nobody can get back in.
gotcha.
Okay, Doug, I've got 5 o'clock, so you want to take it away? And hopefully you got a better internet connection this time.
Well, I hope so. I'm at the EOC and it seems to be working like way better. So yeah, we had quite the glitch the last time. Yeah, well, thank you, Steve. And we're going to be talking about micro islands here. I'm going to share my screen. So I am the Kitsap Auxiliary Radio Service Program Manager, CARS Program Manager. My call is Kilo 7 Charlie Delta Foxtrot. And I do that as a program manager, and I also assist the Department of Emergency Management as in the EOC. I was just finishing up an assignment with our flooding that we had with the king tide, and finished that up last week as deputy operations for that. So anyway, so we're working on this micro island concept, and I believe that Snohomish County actually was the one that kind of started the concept, but I may be wrong about that. Somebody else may have, but they definitely were picking up on it. And a group of counties got together and looked at what would happen if there was a major catastrophic earthquake like the Cascadia, and what would that leave us with? And as it says there, this is a work in progress. So the micro islands. So basically, micro islands are areas that will be isolated due to infrastructure failures if we have a major earthquake like Cascadia or Seattle Fault. They had some experts go out and determine where what kind of infrastructure would be affected and where, and that led to these what we call micro islands. And it's felt that anybody within the micro island will basically be on their own for the most part, except we're trying to help facilitate some of that and help out anybody in the micro islands through this process. And I already talked about the counties, and so move on there. So in our county, we have 25 micro islands that were identified. And these were all placed into 3 geographic branches. And we will see more about that as we go on here. And there's 100 series, 200 series, 300 series for the county. The city of Bainbridge Island has the 400 series. And as you may be aware, we have a lot of military here in Kitsap County, and any of those facilities are considered part of the 500 series. So, so we are working with partners right now, and we will be locating what's called nest kits in most or many of the micro islands. And these will have essential items and instructions on how to get started for the public as well as public officials. And so the challenge, as it says there, is to have these located in a location that's secure, but also somewhere that we can get to for inventorying and testing equipment. So one of the some of the communications capabilities we will have, we're putting in the nest kits are FRS radios, and we may have GMRS and MERS radios also, and those are radios that the public can use. GMRS requires a license if you're going to be on the GMRS frequencies, but the license is $35, and I think it's for 10 years. Somebody correct me if that's not accurate, but it's not very much to operate on GMRS frequencies. And a lot of those have repeaters like ham radio repeaters, that's similar to, but it's on UHF in this particular case. So the plan would be to have the FRS radios be inter-island within the island, and then each island would have a ham radio operator assigned to it. And the main purpose of that ham radio operator would be to be in communications with the branch director for the micro islands, for the 100 grouping of islands. There would be a branch director, and so the amateur would use their radios, which should have more capability than FRS, to contact the branch director. So so a large challenge, as it says, there will be policing the frequencies so that they are used effectively. And one of the problems, we're already kind of anticipating that we're going to run into, we have a bunch of simplex frequencies, simplex amateur radio frequencies. We're anticipating that we're not going to have much in the way of repeaters for a couple of reasons. One, in a catastrophic earthquake, the repeaters may be taken offline right from the start. But secondarily, there's not going to be support to keep the backup generators and things like that going for quite a while, and we expect the power to be out for quite a while. So that's going to be a challenge. So, and we do intend to try to get nest kits on all the micro islands as time goes on, but it's quite expensive, and it's being grant funded in some cases, and so we're going to be looking for more funding for it as time goes on. So what does it look like? Well, it doesn't really look like that so much, an island surrounded by water. It's more like this. This is right out of the micro island guidebook. And if you look right here on the left, that is the 101 micro island. And if you look, you can see there's a red dot right down here, and that's basically that's the base, the CPOD location for that micro island. And there may be some in these some of these other locations as time goes on, as we build this out. One of the things you'll notice, so this is like one page out of the micro island book, and it's one side it's got what the micro island is, which is 101, and the other side you can see, well, what resources are available in that. And in this particular case, you can see that there's CPODs, nest kits, surface fresh water. So you could theoretically get some fresh water if you had the right kind of purifying equipment. There's a grocery store, gas station, airstrip, airdrop, beach port access potentially, major highway, and a fire station. But the gaps are, so that's the resources, and the gaps in this particular case is there's no police or hospital there. And you get some rundowns like what's the estimated population day and night, where do you get fresh water again, prioritize maritime transport, reports to the KCDEM Area 1 branch director or Area 100 branch director. And so then where's the location of that actually? That 101 that you see right there, where is that? Well, you get a Latin long here, you see, and then we've also implemented what 3 words. And if you're not familiar with what 3 words, you can take a look online and look up what 3 words. Somebody, I don't know who the group was that sponsored it, took the whole wide world and broke it into 3 by 3 meter squares, and they all have 3 words to them. So if you want to go to this location if you have the software available, you can put in those 3 words and it'll take you right to that point. And then this is the simplex frequency that is assigned to this particular micro island. That's kind of what the field guide looks like, the event playbook. So its purpose is to provide an easy-to-use, field-worthy guide to lead community members into a response stature. This is right out of the book, following a catastrophic event. And it takes 2 forms: a governing document with instructions, concepts, and data sets for the emergency management professionals. And then there's field guide, which is a community user guide, which is a weatherproof pocket-sized book for community members to use. So those will be available at the in the nest kits and at the CPOD sites and at the micro island sites. So I'm going to do something here. A second. Oops. Gotta back up. So contents, neighborhood emergency supplies and tools, nest kits. CPODs will have 5 sealed containers with the nest kits. What you'll find in there, for example, is emergency task cards. And some of those are definitely geared towards the public so that they can, it's simplified so that they can take them and start doing something effectively. There'll be some tools, there'll be some equipment, and they'll also be able to respond to emergencies, minor emergencies within their neighborhood gathering site. And then there's plays, or in the book, which is just means guidelines for the first 72 hours, 3 to 7 days, and then some weeks afterwards, after the catastrophic event. Because we estimate that, I think the general feeling is that when we have the catastrophic event, it's going to last for weeks and weeks. And so we're going to have to be prepared to take care of mostly ourselves, but if to the degree possible, we can provide support from the emergency management standpoint, we will. So here's some what they contain: instructions for command and communication station, the shelter station, first aid station, water, sanitation and hygiene, wash station, neighborhood check station. So there'll be equipment in all the nest kits to effectively set up these within those micro islands. And this is kind of what it looks like. So you can see the 3 branches over here. This is branch 1 for the 100 series, branch 2 for the branch 200 series, branch 3 for the 300 series. And so the idea is to tie the micro islands together with some interoperability between the micro islands with VHF simplex communications, amateur radio wise. And then they also would be able to talk back to the branches, who then would be able to talk back to the Emergency Operations Center. One of the things that the DEM has done is funded 10 portable communications packages. And these have VHF and UHF capabilities, antennas, including a portable J-pole and a mag mount with coax, a 20 amp hour LiPo battery, and a backup power supply with a solar panel. So hopefully they'll have enough power to operate for a period of time in any case. And then we intend on adding HF and packet capabilities at some point in the future. Also, a part of this will be incorporating the home stations that are going to be out in Kitsap County in the area. So we estimate, if you look on the FCC database in Kitsap County, a couple of years ago, we looked at it, and it was like 1,600 ham radio operators in Kitsap County. All of them aren't active. You know, maybe half of them are active, but one of the challenges will be trying to keep some semblance of control on the frequencies, because, you know, if you have a catastrophic event, everybody wants to get on the air and kind of talk about it. So, whoops, let me see. Okay, so here's this is a couple of the areas. So you see the 100s there off to the left on the left map, and 101, which we were just talking about, which is right up here. And then, so all of these would be more or less tied together with the branch. And so the challenge is trying to figure out where best to put the communications equipment, where best to put the person that's going to act as the communicator for the branch. Those are going to be some challenges. This right here, this 501 on the left, that's Bangor Submarine Base. That's why it's a 500. Down here's the shipyard, 503. And you go over here, and that's just, here's the 200 series. This is in and around Port Orchard and Bremerton up in here. So, you know, there's quite a bit of area to cover. And then like down here, this is actually Mason County. We're just, because this is so isolated from Mason County infrastructure, that we're including them in here to help provide support. Let's see. So this is, yeah, 300. So that's pretty much the 3 sections of the map that cover the micro islands. So our current and future initiatives are to complete the testing of the VHF simplex links between the micro islands, determine best location for the branch director to be located with the amateur radio operator, test links between the branch and the corresponding micro islands, and then we need to test the links between branches and emergency operations center. One of the things that we were talking about the other day amongst my crew was the fact that if we have the major catastrophic event, we're going to have probably a lot of the counties around us also attempting to use the same frequencies. So one of the things we have to do is work with our surrounding counties to see what their 217 or 205 looks like for the event, so that we can hopefully avoid clashing with them too much. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge. So yeah, so more current and future initiatives, test the links between the Emergency Operations Center and Camp Murray. That's another one. That's most likely going to be VHF or HF, sorry. And maybe on the shares, one of the shares frequencies. And then home stations can definitely supplement and enhance the communications, and we want to incorporate them and find out the best way to do that. And I'm working towards a kind of a full-scale communications exercise towards the end of summer, maybe over one of the 5th Saturdays, quarterly exercises, to exercise our plan to see how it's going to work. I know there's going to be some glitches, so we want to test it and see where the glitches are so we can get those sorted out. Another thing that we're doing in the county, which is kind of interesting, is the county has, DEM has bought Zoleo communications devices. I don't know how many people are familiar with those, but we're getting ready to distribute those to city and county government heads and fire chiefs and public health director and so on and so forth. And basically what they do is tie into your cell phone, but they will, they're a separate little box and they tie into your cell phone, and they will make texting communications through either Wi-Fi, cell service, or if they can't get either one of those, it will go through the satellite. Of course, you have to go outside, but it'll give the government officials some ability to communicate with each other, if nothing other than texting. So we have some kind of a communications ability. Some of the other things, we've got a Starlink set up down at the EOC that's available. And there's some devices that I'm not very familiar with called BGANs. Somebody else may be familiar with them, that are also a satellite texting email device that we're going to have. I believe our director said yesterday we had 4 of them, and we're going to kind of strategically locate them so that we have the ability to communicate with those as well. So there's a lot of things happening in the county, and this micro island is pretty exciting to deal with. It's moving forward, and which is kind of fun, and it's kind of fun to be part of it. So got a good group of folks that are helping out with it. Anyway, that was kind of a quick overview. Any questions that I can answer?
So Doug, I had a question. I threw it in the chat. I wasn't sure if you could see chat or not. I also threw it there, so I would remember to ask you later. Is the catastrophic event playbook that you guys came up with, is that available as a PDF so other people outside the county can see it?
It will be. It's not, I don't think it's quite yet. There was some discussion about having it on the web page for DEM, and part of it is, you might take a look, Steve. I don't know. We've been going back and forth on it. It may be there. You just go on Kitsap DEM and take a look. I want to say it is, but so it's not, we're really not ready for prime time yet with it. So we're kind of hesitant to get it out to the public and post it. So that's why I'm hesitating a little bit. But if you'd like to see it, we could sure get you a copy, I'm sure.
Sounds good. I'd just like to steal ideas.
Well, sure. Yeah. So we had a Oregon ACES class this last weekend, and Scott Honecker was over here, and I showed him the book, and he was taking pictures of it, and he thought it was pretty cool. So, which, if you guys haven't had that class delivered in your communities or areas, it's a really good class. So anyway, that's all I've got, if there's no questions. It doesn't sound like there is any.
We thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing my screen here. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. And yeah.
Well, thanks for heading down to the EOC to be able to do this on a better link.
Yeah, so I was just talking to my neighbor, and he said, hey, they just ran the fiber optic to my house. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed it's going to be soon. And one other thing I was going to say is that our acting director is very, very supportive of amateur radio. He went and got his license, KK7IHS, I think it is. So pretty nice to have somebody jump in and be real supportive. And
This is Jan?
yes, Jan, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I was out in the field with this event that we had, and he said, hey, let's try testing out, see if we can communicate. So we did. So it was good. Yep, it's fun. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you all. And thanks for letting me participate. And we will see you later. Have a good rest of the evening.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. See you, Steve.
And I think I can end the meeting here.